By the time the sheriff's horse stopped at the gate, the girl had already reached for the rifle. Her hand moved fast, too fast for someone who claimed she was tired of running. Wade Mercer caught the barrel before she could lift it, and for one sharp second they stood there in the yard like enemies instead of two people who had learned each other by heart. Her breath came hard. His voice stayed low. If you fire first, they get the story they came looking for. She looked up at him with fury and fear tangled together. There was no crying in her then, no shaking either, just that old wild look that had first brought her to his ranch, the kind that came from being hunted too long. Down at the gate, the sheriff called her name like he owned it. Wade did not let go of the rifle. You want to run, I won't stop you. You want to stand, then stand with me. But you do not go back to being what they branded you. She stared at him a moment longer, then slowly loosened her grip. The air between them went tight and still. Behind them, the kitchen door banged once in the wind. In front of them, dust lifted around the sheriff's horse. The girl drew one long breath and stepped to Wade's side. There was dirt on her cheek and a fresh split on her knuckles from morning work in the barn. She looked nothing like a thief. She looked like someone who had survived. Wade lifted the rifle to his shoulder and walked toward the gate. She came with him. The sheriff waited below with his badge, his hard mouth, and the lie that had chased her clear across Montana. This time she was not facing him alone. 3 weeks earlier, Wade had found her behind the smokehouse with a pistol in both hands and blood at the corner of her mouth. He had come around the side of the barn at first light, expecting nothing more than a loose latch or a fox after the hens. Instead, he saw a slim figure crouched low in the weeds, hat gone, hair falling from a rough braid, coat torn at the sleeve. She was young. Not a child, but young enough that the sight of the gun in her hands hit him wrong. He brought up his rifle and kept his distance. You planning to use that thing or pray over it? She snapped her head toward him. Her eyes were sharp and worn out at the same time. For half a heartbeat he thought she might pull the trigger. Then something in her face broke. Not weakness, just exhaustion. The pistol dipped. I ain't stealing from you, she said. Wade looked her over. Big boots, trail dust clear up to her knees, a burn mark on her wrist where her sleeve had slipped back. Not a fresh wound, old enough to be healing, ugly enough to make him look twice. He had seen brands on cattle his whole life. Seeing one on skin turned his stomach. That may be true, he said, but you are hiding on my land with a loaded gun. Makes a poor first impression. She pushed herself up slowly, like every joint hurt. Then I'll go. She took one step and nearly folded where she stood. Wade lowered his rifle, not all the way, but enough. You got a name? The girl hesitated. Mara Vale. He had a feeling that might not be the one she was born with. It was the one she wanted to use, and that told him plenty. You hungry, Mara Vale? Her chin lifted on pride alone, but her voice gave her away. Yes. He jerked his head toward the house. Come eat before you fall down and make a bigger nuisance of yourself. His ranch sat south of Alder Ridge, where the grasslands broke against dark pine and the creek bent cold along the north pasture. It had been a quiet place for a long time, too quiet some days. Since his wife died from fever 3 winters before, Wade had gotten used to silence so complete it felt nailed into the walls. He worked. He slept. He spoke when there was need. That was enough, or close to it. Then this stranger walked in with a cut lip, a branded wrist, and trouble hanging off her like storm weather. Inside, he set beans and bread in front of her and asked nothing while she ate. She tried to take small bites at first. That lasted less than a minute. Hunger won. Wade sat across from her and watched the way she kept one hand near the pistol resting by her chair. She was ready to bolt even while chewing. When the plate was clean, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and said, I did not steal the money. Wade leaned back a little. I did not ask. You were going to. Probably. Her jaw tightened. A stable owner's son vanished near Fort Custer, so did a horse and a cash pouch. He'd been drinking for 2 days. I was the easiest person to blame, so they blamed me. By the time he turned up drunk in another town, they had already done this. She shoved back her sleeve and showed him the mark fully. It was small, crude, and mean. A thief's brand, not official, worse than official, personal. Wade felt heat rise in his chest. Who put that on you? The sheriff stood there while it happened. She pulled the sleeve down again. That enough truth for one morning. He should have told her to ride on. A man alone on a ranch had no business inviting in another person's trouble. He had spring fence to mend, a lame gelding to watch, and a freight wagon due by week's end. Trouble multiplied. That was a law as old as weather. Instead he said, "You know how to shoot that pistol." She looked at him as if the question insulted her. Then her eyes dropped. Not well enough. That can be fixed. She frowned. Why would you help me? Wade held her gaze. The honest answer came easier than he liked. Because somebody ought to. She slept in the barn that first night. He did not argue. He left a blanket over the stall door and a lantern by the wall. In the morning she was already awake, carrying water from the pump as if she meant to pay for every bite she had eaten. He watched from the porch while the dawn lifted over the ridge. She moved carefully, like someone used to pain and too stubborn to show it. By noon he had bottles lined along the back fence. She stood with his old revolver in both hands, shoulders tight. I said I can shoot some. And I said not well enough. The first shot went wide. The second kicked her wrist back. The third clipped dirt 2 feet short of the post. She cursed once under her breath. Wade hid a smile. You are fighting the gun. I know that. Then stop. She shot him a hard look but reset her stance. He stepped behind her, careful, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She did not. He touched her elbow first, then the line of her shoulder. Loosen here, lock here. Breathe before the pull, not after. She fired again. The bottle jumped and spun off the fence. Mara stared at the broken glass. There, Wade said. That one belonged to you. A strange look crossed her face. Not joy exactly. More like disbelief that success had not been taken back from her the moment it arrived. They trained every day after chores. He taught her to stand square, shoot from the hip at close range, load in a hurry, and think before panic took hold. She learned fast. Faster than most boys he had known growing up, and faster than the sons he had once imagined but never got to raise. She missed less each day. On the 5th morning she hit 3 bottles in a row, then turned to him with a grin so sudden it changed her whole face. "You've been pretending I was poor so you could feel useful?" she asked. "No," he said. "You were poor." She laughed then, a real laugh from down deep. It startled him more than the gunfire ever had. Little by little, the place changed around her. She mended torn feed sacks without being asked, fixed a hinge on the chicken coop with wire and patience, took to his bay mare with a calm hand and firm voice. The hunted look in her eyes did not vanish, but it no longer ruled every hour. Sometimes he would catch her sitting on the porch at dusk, staring over the pasture as if she could not understand how a quiet evening was allowed to exist. One night after supper, he found her turning his spare rifle over in her lap. The lamp on the table threw soft light over her hands. "You always keep this one clean," she said. "It was my father's." She nodded and ran a thumb along the wood. "Mine used to say a rifle tells the truth on a man. You flinch, it shows. You rush, it shows. You lie to yourself, it shows that too." Wade sat across from her. "Your father teach you that before he left or before he drank himself into the ground?" Her head came up. He regretted the words as soon as they left him. Then she surprised him. Both. Silence settled between them. Fire snapped in the stove. Outside, wind brushed the cottonwoods along the creek. After a while she said, "You ever want children?" The question came so plain it left no room to dodge. Wade looked at his hands. "I thought I would have sons." She waited. He gave a small shrug. Life had other plans. Mara rested the rifle across her knees. "You keep teaching me like I disappointed you by not being one." That pulled a rough laugh out of him. "No, I keep teaching you because you listen better than any son I might have had." Her mouth softened. So did something in his chest. From there the days took on a shape he had not expected. Not family, not yet. Something more fragile than that, and stronger too. Trust built in chores, in meals, in the way she stopped reaching for a weapon every time a horse snorted outside. Trust built when she moved from the barn to the small room off the kitchen without making a speech over it. Trust built when she let him see the brand again while he wrapped salve around the cracked skin there and did not pull away. Then, on the 21st day, dust rose at the far end of the road. Mara saw it first from the wash line. Wade saw her whole body go still before he ever saw the rider. By the time he reached the yard, she had his rifle in her hands, and that old hunted look was back, harder now because she had something to lose. Which was how they came to stand together in the yard while the sheriff waited at the gate and called her by the name she no longer wanted. Wade stepped forward until his boots met the road dust. The sheriff sat tall in the saddle, one hand near his sidearm, eyes moving from Wade to the girl beside him. "I've come for Leila Boone," the sheriff said. "She's wanted for theft." Mara did not move. Wade did not look at her. His rifle stayed easy in his hands. "Then you rode to the wrong ranch." The sheriff's gaze sharpened. "You hiding her?" Wade's mouth set. "I said you are in the wrong place." Beside him, he felt Mara straighten her back. The fear was still there, so was something new. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "I can come back with the law." Wade answered without heat. "Then come back with enough of it." The man's eyes flicked once more toward Mara's wrist, then up to her face. He looked unsettled, and Wade understood why. The girl at his side did not look broken anymore. The sheriff turned his horse at last, but not before saying, "This isn't finished." "No," Mara said quietly, "it isn't." He rode off in a trail of dust and bad temper. Wade waited until the rider was gone before lowering the rifle. Only then did he turn to her. "You want to tell me who Leila Boone is?" he asked. "Or do I wait until supper for the truth?" Mara looked down the road, then at him. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were steady. "Leila Boone," she said, "is the girl they tried to bury." Wade did not answer her right away. He stood in the yard with the rifle still in one hand, looking down the empty road where the sheriff had disappeared. The wind moved through the dry grass and rattled the loose end of the wash line. Behind the barn, one of the horses stamped and snorted, bothered by the tension hanging in the air. Mara stayed where she was. She had not taken a full breath since the man rode in. Wade could see it in the way her chest barely moved. At last he set the rifle against the porch rail and said, "Then we start there." She followed him inside without a word. He poured water into a cup and pushed it across the table. Her fingers brushed the tin, cold and stiff. For a moment she only looked at it. Then she drank half in one go and sat down hard, like her legs had finally remembered they were tired. Wade took the chair opposite her. The room smelled of dust, coffee grounds, and the stew he had meant to warm before all this started. It felt smaller than usual now, smaller and sharper. "My real name is Leila Boone," she said. Wade nodded once. "I figured Mara Vale had the sound of something chosen." It was. She rubbed her thumb against the edge of the cup. "I needed a name no one hated yet." He let that sit a moment. "Go on." She stared at the tabletop when she spoke, as if the grain of the wood was easier to face than him. "I worked at a stable in Fort Custer. I cleaned stalls, hauled feed, patched harness, whatever they handed me. The owner's son drank more than he worked. One night he lost money in a card game. Next morning he was gone, and so were a horse and the cash pouch from the office. They said I took both." "But you didn't." "No," her voice sharpened then flattened again. "He came back 3 days later, drunk and laughing, long after they'd dragged me through town and marked me." Wade felt his jaw harden, and no one stopped it. "One man could have." She lifted her eyes to his. "A stable hand named Emmett Pike. He saw the owner's son leave with the money. He saw him saddle the horse. He knew." She swallowed. He said nothing. Wade leaned back, out of fear. Out of cowardice. She said it plain. No tears, no tremble. That made it worse. "The sheriff's brother handles freight contracts. The stable owner moves stock through half the county. Men like that do not need truth. They need someone small enough to carry blame." Wade studied her face. The first day she had arrived, everything in her had been aimed at survival. Now anger sat closer to the surface, cleaner than fear, easier to respect. "Why come this far west?" he asked. "Because the man who burned me said if he ever saw me again, he would make sure the next mark went on my cheek." She looked down at her wrist. "I thought if I could get far enough, maybe I could become somebody else before they caught up." Wade stood and crossed to the stove. He needed movement, needed something to do with his hands before the rage in him turned foolish. He set the kettle on and fed 2 pieces of wood into the fire. "You should have told me all of it before now." She gave a tired smile that did not reach her eyes. "Would you have let me stay?" He turned to look at her. "Yes." That seemed to hit her harder than he meant it to. Her shoulders lost some of their tension. She stared at him like he had said something she had wanted too badly to trust. He brought the kettle back once it began to murmur and made coffee thick and plain. They drank in silence for a while. The quiet between them had changed again. Before, it had been cautious. Then it became easy. Now it felt honest. There was a difference. Honest quiet carried more weight. When the cups were empty, Wade said, "If that sheriff rode this far, he means to come again." Leela nodded. She did not correct him when he used her real name. "I know." "You want to leave before he does?" Her answer came at once, "No." Something deep in him settled at that. "Good." She looked up. "That's simple." "No, nothing about this is simple." He rested both hands on the back of the chair across from her. "But I wanted to hear what you wanted before I started deciding what happens next." The corners of her mouth moved faintly. "And what happens next?" "We make it harder for any man to drag you off this place." That afternoon, training changed. Before, he had been teaching her to shoot straight. Now he taught her to stay alive. He walked her through loading by touch in fading light, showed her where to stand if she had to fire from the porch and where to move if shots came through the yard. He made her practice not just hitting bottles but hitting them fast after turning from a different direction, after kneeling, after stepping from behind cover. She missed more when he pushed speed. She cursed more too. "Again," he said. She slammed fresh rounds into the revolver. "You enjoy this too much." "I enjoy you learning while there is still time to learn." That shut her up. She lifted the pistol, fired once, twice, then a third time. 2 bottles shattered. 1 spun and stayed standing. Wade walked past her, set another bottle in place and said, "Your hand tenses right before the pull." "I know." "Then fix it." She glared at the back of his hat. "You ever think maybe I need softer instruction?" He turned his head just enough for her to catch the shape of his grin. "No." A sound escaped her then, halfway between a laugh and a groan. When she fired again, the last bottle burst clean. By sundown, her shoulder was sore and her temper worn thin. They sat on overturned buckets behind the barn while the sky went copper over the ridge. Wade handed her a rag for the pistol. She cleaned it in silence, slower than usual. He watched the light touch the side of her face and thought how strange it was that Trouble had come to his ranch wearing a borrowed name and left him caring whether she had eaten enough at noon. After a long while she said, "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Looking at me like you're trying to solve something." Wade rested his forearms on his knees. "Maybe I am." "You will fail." "I usually do." That got a real laugh from her, quick and low. Then she grew serious again. "If he comes back with more men, I don't want blood on your land because of me." He looked out toward the pasture. "This land has seen blood before you and it will see it after. That's not the part that troubles me." "What does?" He turned back to her. "You thinking you are worth less because bad men said so." She looked away first. The evening breeze pulled loose strands of hair across her cheek. Hard habit to shake. "I know." That surprised her. "How?" Wade sat quiet for a few breaths. He was not a man who opened old doors unless there was reason. But there was reason now. "When my wife died, half the town acted like I had failed her somehow. Did not fetch the doctor fast enough. Did not pray hard enough. Did not notice soon enough. Folks always need someone to blame when pain shows up." He shrugged once. I started believing them for a time. Leela's face softened. Did you? No, he looked down at his hands, but I wasted a year acting as if I had. The sun slid lower. Shadows stretched long from the fence posts. She set the clean pistol in her lap and said, very quietly, I am tired of wasting years. He met her eyes. Then don't. The next morning he rode with her to the north meadow, where the ground opened wide and the sound of shots would not spook the horses. He set tin cans along a fallen log and had her fire from horseback at a slow walk. The first pass was ugly. She nearly lost the hat he had lent her and hit only dirt. On the second pass she clipped one can. By the fourth she hit three. Wade pretended not to be impressed. She pretended not to notice he was. By midday they stopped near the creek to water the horses. Leela crouched by the bank and splashed her face. The cold made her gasp. Wade sat on a rock nearby, hat tipped low. They had not spoken for several minutes, but it was the good kind of silence again. You ever have daughters? She asked suddenly. He blinked at that. No. You would have done well with one. He looked at her hands, wet and trembling slightly from the cold, then at the brand half hidden beneath her sleeve, then at the revolver resting beside her in the grass. Maybe I got a late start. She did not smile, not fully. But something opened in her expression that felt deeper than humor. She stood and came back toward him, stopping close enough that he could smell creek water and soap on her skin. You keep saying things that make a person careless. Wade rose slowly. About what? About staying. He did not touch her, wanted to but did not. Maybe staying is not carelessness. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. The horses drank at the water's edge. The creek murmured over stone. Somewhere in the trees a bird lifted and flapped away. Then Leela took one half step back and reached for her revolver. If you keep staring at me like that, she said, voice unsteady now, I am going to miss every target you set. He cleared his throat. Then we'd best get back to work. That evening, as they rode toward the ranch with the light thinning around them, Wade saw smoke where there should have been none. Wade saw the smoke first as a dark smear above the cottonwoods, not heavy enough for a barn fire, too thin for brush. A signal, maybe, or a cook fire where none should have been. He pressed his heels to the gelding and the horse surged forward. Beside him, Leela did the same without needing a word. By the time they reached the rise above the house, both of them had rifles in hand. The smoke came from behind the bunk shed. Someone had built a small fire ring near the edge of the yard and left it burning low. No horse stood at the hitch rail. No wagon waited by the gate. The place looked empty at first glance, but Wade trusted first glances less and less these days. He swung down and handed his reins to Leela. Circle wide. If you see movement, do not call out, come from the side. She nodded once and moved at once, low and quick, slipping toward the barn wall with her rifle tucked close. Wade went straight in through the front door. The house was still, table where he left it. Cups washed and turned upside down by the basin. No one in the front room. He checked the kitchen, then the back room, then the small room where Leela slept. Empty. He stepped back outside just as she came around the shed. Nothing, she said softly. He walked to the fire ring and crouched. Fresh ash, a heel mark in the dirt, coffee grounds tossed carelessly into the weeds. Whoever had been here had taken time enough to rest, eat, and let the message settle. Wade straightened slowly. They wanted us to know they could come close. Leela looked toward the road. The sheriff. Maybe, he scanned the fence line, maybe someone he sent. She said nothing, but he could feel her anger rising. It did not flare like it had weeks before. It gathered. That worried him more. Anger that learned patience became dangerous. At supper neither of them ate much. Night came early behind a bank of gray cloud rolling down from the mountains. Wade barred the doors, checked the windows, and hung the lantern lower so light would not spill far. Leela sat at the table with the revolver open in front of her, cleaning each part with steady hands. You think they were watching us? She asked, likely. She slid the cylinder back into place. Then they know I can shoot now. Wade looked over from the hearth. You sound pleased. I am. She lifted her eyes to him. For too long men like that thought I was easy prey. He could not argue with that. Still, he said, knowing how to shoot and wanting to shoot are not the same thing. I know. He believed that. The hardness in her had never felt cruel, only wounded, only tested past reason. She wanted safety, not blood, but if men kept coming for her, one might lead to the other. After a while she asked, "Did you ever kill anyone?" Wade fed one more split log into the stove before answering. Once. Her gaze stayed on him. It was during the winter after my father died. Two men came for cattle they claimed he owed. He did not owe them. They were counting on grief making me weak. He rested a hand on the stove door. One drew first. Leela watched him closely. Did it change you? Yes. Did it ruin you? No, he looked back at her, but it stayed. She folded her hands around the revolver. That is what I fear. He crossed the room and sat down across from her. Then hold on to that fear. Men who stop fearing a gun are the ones most likely to use it wrong. The wind pushed harder at the walls as the night deepened. Near midnight the first rain came. It tapped the roof, then drummed, then eased again. Leela slept in her room with the door open. Wade sat by the kitchen window longer than he needed to, rifle across his knees, watching the yard between flashes of pale sky. Nothing moved. No rider, no lantern, only rain and dark. By dawn the storm had passed, leaving the ground black and damp and smelling of pine and wet earth. Wade stepped onto the porch with coffee in one hand and found boot prints in the mud below the rail. Not old prints, fresh enough that the edges still held. He crouched to study them. One man, heavy tread, had come up close to the house in the night, then gone back toward the creek instead of the road. Wade's neck tightened. He did not hear Leela behind him until she spoke. How close? He stepped aside so she could see, her mouth flattened. He wanted us to find them. Yes. She wrapped her arms across herself against the morning chill. Then, I am done waiting for him to choose the next move. Wade rose. What are you thinking? She looked toward the north pasture where the creek cut through willow and stone. If someone is watching from nearby, they need a place to hole up, water, cover, a way to see the yard without crossing open ground. Her eyes narrowed. The old trapper cabin above the creek bend. He had forgotten about it, not because it was hidden but because no one had used it in years. Half-collapsed roof, one wall leaning, still enough shelter for a patient man. Wade set down the coffee untouched. We ride now. The trail to the old cabin wound through wet grass and broken pine shadow. Their horses moved carefully on the slick ground. Wade rode ahead until the slope steepened, then both dismounted and led the animals the rest of the way. Leela moved with her rifle easy in both hands, every step alert. The rain had sharpened scents all over the hillside. Mud, needles, moss, wood rot. When they reached the ridge above the creek bend, Wade signaled for her to stop. Below them, through a stand of spruce, sat the cabin. Smoke did not rise from it. No horse was tied nearby. No movement showed in the broken doorway. Still, Wade felt the same thing he felt on the morning he first found her behind the smokehouse. Presence, trouble, something breathing under stillness. He leaned close to her ear. We go wide, I take left. She nodded. They separated without sound. Wade circled downslope through brush and wet stone until the cabin sat half across from him. He waited there long enough to see if anything shifted. Nothing did. Then he heard Leela's whistle, faint and low, from the other side. Ready. Wade stepped into view first, rifle raised. Come out. No answer. He advanced 3 paces. Come out now or I start putting holes through the wall. A voice from inside answered at last, rough and annoyed. That be a shame. Roof's bad enough. Wade saw the man a heartbeat later, mid-30s maybe, unshaven, brown coat gone slick with old use. One hand lifted, empty, the other still inside the doorway where Wade could not see it. Show both hands, Wade said. The man hesitated, then brought out the second. No gun. Knife at his belt, though. Wade heard Leela moving in behind him before the stranger did. The man's eyes flicked past Wade's shoulder and changed when he realized he was trapped from both sides. "You out here for hunting?" Wade asked. The stranger gave a humorless smile. "Depends what you're calling game." Leela stepped into the open then, rifle pointed straight at his chest. The man looked at her and recognition came quick. "There she is," he said. The calm in her voice was colder than the rain had been. "You know my name." "Most of the county does by now." Wade took one step closer. "You have one chance to explain why you were on my porch last night." The man spat into the mud. "Sheriff Kelton wanted to know if the girl was here. I was told to look, that's all." Leela did not blink. "And the fire in the yard?" "Message?" He looked between them. "You were supposed to get nervous and send her off on your own. Save everyone time." Wade's grip tightened on the rifle. "You rode all this way to scare a woman." The man's face hardened. "I rode because Kelton pays." It was Leila who moved first. Not with the gun, with her voice. "Did he pay the men who held me down too?" The question landed like a hammer. The stranger's eyes shifted away for the first time. That was answer enough. Wade felt anger rise so hard it nearly blurred his sight. He stepped in until the barrel touched the man's coat. "Listen carefully. You ride back to Kelton and tell him this. He comes onto my land again, or sends another man to do his creeping for him. I bury the next one where the trees thin and the wolves do the rest." The stranger swallowed. "That a threat?" "No," Wade said. "That is me saving words." For a second Wade thought the man might do something stupid. Reach, run, twist for the knife. Instead he lifted his chin toward Leela. "He ain't worth this trouble. Sheriff says she stole from powerful men. Says she lies smooth enough to make saints doubt themselves." Leela's expression did not change. "And what do you think?" The man looked at the brand on her wrist, then at her face again. Something there shifted. Not kindness. Maybe shame, maybe uncertainty. "I think you don't look how he described." Wade almost laughed at that bitter little sentence. Men always waited too long to see what stood in front of them. Leela lowered her rifle a fraction. "Then carry your own eyes back with you when you ride." The stranger nodded once, slow. Then he stepped away from the doorway. Wade took the knife from his belt, kicked open the cabin door and found a bedroll, jerky, a canteen, and a spyglass pointed toward the ranch from the window gap. Proof enough. He tossed the gear into the mud. "Walk to your horse," Wade said. When the man had gone, when the sound of his boots faded through the trees, the silence around the cabin came down heavy and strange. Leela lowered her rifle fully but did not relax. Wade could see her chest rising too fast. "You all right?" he asked. She gave a short nod, then shook her head. "No." He crossed to her. "What part?" Her voice broke for the first time that day. The part where he knew. The part where men always know and still do nothing. The rifle slipped from her hand into the wet grass. Wade caught her by the shoulders before she could turn away from him. She stood stiff for 1 second, then all the strength she had held upright since morning gave way at once. She did not sob loudly. It was worse than that, quiet tears, shaking breath, grief with no room left to hide in. Wade pulled her against him. She pressed her face into his coat like she hated needing to, like she needed it anyway. "I am tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of proving I deserved better." He closed his eyes and held her tighter. "Then stop proving it." She drew back enough to look up at him. Rainwater still clung to loose strands of her hair. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and he had never wanted anything more fiercely than to give her a life where no one ever made her flinch again. His hand came up to her cheek before he thought it through. She leaned into it at once. Then she kissed him, not softly, not careful. It came like truth comes when it has been held back too long. Wade caught her waist and kissed her back with all the hunger and fear and restraint he had been burying since the first week she slept under his roof. The world narrowed to the wet smell of pine, the touch of her mouth, the tremble that ran through her when he drew her closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them stayed still. Leela rested her forehead against his chest and let out one uneven breath. "That was a mistake," she murmured. Wade looked down at her. No. She lifted her eyes. You do not know what I was going to say next. I do. His thumb brushed the edge of her jaw. And you're wrong. The ghost of a smile touched her mouth, then disappeared. This is dangerous. So are you. That pulled a breath of laughter out of her, shaky but real. They stood like that a little longer beside the ruined cabin while the clouds thinned and a weak patch of sun touched the tops of the pines. Then Wade bent, picked up her rifle and handed it back. Come on, he said. Let's go home before I do something foolish like kiss you again before noon. She took the rifle, but her hand stayed in his for one more second before letting go. On the ride back, neither of them spoke much. They did not need to. Something between them had crossed a line and would not cross back. By the time the ranch came into view below the ridge, Leela felt it as clearly as the reins in her hands. The danger had not passed, but neither had the waiting. When they reached the ranch, nothing looked different. The porch still leaned a little on the west side. The water barrel still sat by the shed. The hens still scratched near the fence as if the world had not shifted in the space of one wet afternoon, but everything had shifted. Leela felt it in the silence between them, not awkward silence, not uncertain, something fuller. The kind that carried what had happened without needing to name it every minute. Wade took the horses to the barn. She followed with the tack, and for a while they worked side by side in the familiar rhythm that had built itself over the last weeks. Leather off, blankets hung, hooves checked, grain measured. The bay mare nudged Leela's shoulder while she poured feed, and she scratched the horse between the ears absently. When she turned, Wade was standing a few feet away, watching her with that same steady look that had undone her up on the ridge. She set down the scoop. You keep doing that, and I am going to start thinking you mean something by it. His mouth moved just barely. You ought to start. Heat climbed her neck. She hated how easily he could do that with one plain sentence. She also hated that she liked it. We still have a sheriff problem. I know. And a man who was willing to watch the yard in the dark. I know that too. She folded her arms. Then maybe now is not the time for you to look at me like that. Wade stepped closer, one hand resting on the stall rail. Maybe it's exactly the time. That stole the next words from her. For a second she could only look at him. He did not crowd her, did not reach for her. He only stood there in the smell of hay and horse sweat and fresh grain, giving her the choice to step away if she wanted. She did not. What are we doing? She asked at last. His answer came without strain. What we've been doing from the start, telling the truth slower than either of us wanted. Her throat tightened. And the truth is that I have cared about you for longer than was wise. The barn went quiet except for the horses chewing. Leela dropped her gaze, then forced it back up. You say things like that too calmly. I am not calm. That surprised a laugh out of her, small and quick. You hide it well. I've had practice. She should have said something clever after that, something guarded. Instead, she said the one thing that had been pushing against her ribs for days. I have been scared to want any of this. Wade's eyes softened, not with pity but with understanding that went deeper. I know. No, she shook her head. I do not think you do. Wanting a place is dangerous when the world has taught you it can be taken. Wanting a person is worse. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, you think if you love something, it gives men a better way to hurt you. She did not answer, he did it for her. You're right. The honesty of it hit harder than comfort would have. Leela let out a slow breath. That is not the answer I expected. I wasn't aiming to soothe you. His voice stayed low and even. I was aiming to respect what you've lived through. For some reason that nearly broke her all over again. She looked away, blinking hard. Wade. He closed the distance then, not all at once, just enough to lay his hand over hers where it rested on the stall rail. His palm was rough and warm. You do not have to decide everything today. Not about me. Not about this. She turned her hand and gripped his fingers. It was the smallest thing in the world, and it felt larger than the whole ranch. Good, she said softly, because I don't know how. That night the sky cleared hard and cold. The stars came out sharp above the ridge, and a skin of frost silvered the grass by morning. Leela woke before dawn and lay still for a few breaths, listening. Wind at the eaves, one board in the front room shifting as the house settled, Wade moving somewhere near the stove. The sound of him doing ordinary things steadied her. It had begun doing that without her permission. She dressed and stepped into the kitchen. He had already set coffee on and was cutting bacon into a pan. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." He gave her a look that said he knew the answer had been smaller than that. She sat at the table and wrapped both hands around the warm cup he placed in front of her. After a few quiet minutes, Wade said, "The man at the cabin told us enough to know Kelton means to push until someone stops him." Leela nodded. "So we decide whether stopping him means waiting here or riding out and forcing the matter." She looked up sharply. "You would ride into Fort Custer with me?" "If that's the move, yes." The thought sent fear through her before relief had a chance to settle. Fort Custer meant the stable yard, the office, the faces, the place where her name had been stripped from her and replaced with a brand. She stared into the coffee until the dark surface stilled. "There is one man there I need to face before I can think straight." "Emmett Pike." She glanced up. "You remember everything I tell you." "I try to remember what matters." That was another one of his plain sentences that did too much. She pushed a breath out through her nose and said, "Yes, Emmett." Wade slid the bacon onto a plate and brought it to the table with bread. "You want justice from him or truth?" She thought longer than she expected to. "Truth," she said at last. "Justice coming from men like him feels too small." He sat down across from her. "Then we ride tomorrow, fresh horses, 2 days if the weather holds." She should have felt dread alone. Instead, there was relief in having the fear pointed somewhere clear. She ate more than she expected to. Wade noticed and said nothing, which was one of the things she had come to value most in him. That day they worked as if travel were just another chore. He checked the wagon, though they ended up choosing horses instead. She mended a split in her bedroll and packed salt pork, biscuits, dried apples, and coffee in a canvas sack. He cleaned both rifles. She counted cartridges twice. They moved around each other with easy purpose until the sun lowered and the cold came down from the timber. At dusk, Wade found her behind the barn with the revolver in hand. "I already shot this morning," she said before he could speak. "I know." She looked at the fence post ahead of her. "I wanted one more try." He came to stand beside her. The last light caught the side of his face and made the tired lines there gentler somehow. "At what?" She lifted the pistol. 20 paces out, a rusted hinge hung from a nail on the post. Small target, bad light, bad time for clean hands. She pulled the trigger once. The hinge rang hard and spun. Wade let out a soft breath. That was showing off. She lowered the gun. "Maybe." He turned to her. "You shoot straighter now than most boys I knew growing up." She smiled without looking at him. "That what you tell all the girls you hide from sheriffs?" "Never had cause to before." That did make her look. The air seemed to tighten around them again, but different from before. Warmer, less frightened. He reached out and took the revolver from her hand, set it on the barrel nearby, then rested both hands at her waist. Leela. No one had ever said her name quite like that. Not careful, not ownership. Recognition, the simple fact of her. She put one hand flat against his chest and felt the steady beat under it. "If we ride back there," she said, "things may not go clean." "They won't. I may hear things I do not want to hear." "You will." She swallowed. "And you still mean to come?" He did not hesitate. "Yes." That was the moment she stopped resisting the truth of him. She rose onto her toes and kissed him first this time. Slow at the start. Deliberate. A choice, not a surrender. Wade's hands tightened at her waist as he kissed her back, deeper now, the kind of kiss that carried every restrained look and unfinished sentence of the weeks behind them. She had known hunger in many forms, but not this one. Not hunger answered with gentleness instead of taking. When they drew apart, both of them stayed close enough that their breath still mingled in the cold air. "I have never done anything the easy way," she murmured. Wade touched his forehead to hers. "That makes two of us." She laughed softly, and the sound stayed between them like a small, warm thing. They slept little that night, though not for the same reasons as before. They talked by the stove after supper while the lantern burned low. Not grand talk. Not promises dressed up to sound pretty. Real talk. He told her how quiet the ranch had become after fever took his wife, how silence could harden a man if he let it. She told him about the first winter she worked at the stable, sleeping under patched blankets in the loft because she could not afford a proper room. He told her he had once wanted sons because that was what men around him expected him to want. She told him she had stopped imagining any future at all the day they held her down for the brand. "You imagine one now?" he asked. She looked at the fire, then at him. "I am trying." "Good. That is all you have to say." "It is enough." She shook her head. "You are impossible. And yet here you are." By first light they were on the trail east. The land unrolled before them in long brown-gold stretches broken by pine, stone, and creek crossings that ran colder with every mile. They spoke little the first half of the day. Riding toward a wound has a way of quieting a person. By noon they stopped near a narrow stream to water the horses. Wade knelt to refill the canteen while Leela stood a few steps off, staring east. "You can still turn back," he said. "No." He corked the canteen and rose. "I know, thought I should say it once." She looked at him, and there was gratitude in her eyes even then. "If I turn back now, I stay half buried." He nodded. "Then we keep going." They camped that night in a stand of cottonwoods above the river flats. The fire stayed low. The food was plain. The dark felt wider away from the ranch. Leela sat with her knees drawn up while Wade sharpened his knife by the light. Sparks from the whetstone came and vanished. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly. She looked over. "That is a late question." "Answer it anyway." "Yes," she said, "more than I know what to do with." He set the blade aside. "Then when we get to town, if something turns, you listen the first time I tell you to move." She held his gaze. "Only if you do the same when I tell you to duck." That pulled a brief smile from him. Fair enough. They lay down after that, each under separate blankets, close enough to hear the other breathe. Leela watched the stars through bare branches until her eyes grew heavy. Just before sleep took her, Wade's voice came low through the dark. "When this is over, we go home." Home? The word settled somewhere deep and stayed there. By the next afternoon, Fort Custer rose ahead of them in dust, timber, and old memory. Fort Custer looked smaller than Leela remembered, which was its own kind of insult. For months it had filled her mind like a place too large to escape, a whole world built to corner her. Now, riding in beside Wade with dust on her skirt and a rifle at her saddle, it looked like what it had always been. A hard little town with a church steeple, a feed store, a smithy, and too many men who believed power made them right. The sight of it still turned her stomach. Her back went straight anyway. Wade did not crowd her as they rode in. He kept close enough to reach her, far enough to let her choose her own pace. That mattered. Every small thing about him mattered now. They tied their horses at the public rail near the livery. A few men on the boardwalk glanced their way, then looked again when they noticed Leela. Some did not recognize her. Some did. She saw it in the pause, in the narrowing of eyes, in the quick whisper that passed from one mouth to another and died when Wade turned his head. "You still want Pike first?" he asked quietly. "Yes." They went through the side lane behind the grain shed and down toward the stable yard. The place smelled the same as it always had. Hay gone sour in one corner. Leather oil, horse sweat. Wet earth packed hard by years of hooves. The smell hit her harder than she expected. It was not memory alone. It was humiliation, fear, cold nights in the loft. The morning they dragged her across the yard while men watched and chose not to see. Her steps slowed. Wade noticed without saying so. His hand brushed the middle of her back, light and brief, not enough to guide. Just enough to remind her she was not alone inside this place anymore. Emmett Pike stood by the tack room door sorting harness straps into a crate. He looked older than the man she had carried in her mind. His shoulders were heavier, his hair thinner at the temples, but the droop in him was the same. It lived in his neck, in the set of his mouth, in the way he seemed to expect disappointment before it arrived. He looked up when their boots crossed the yard. At first he only saw Wade. Then his eyes found Leela, and all the color left his face. For a moment none of them spoke. Then Emmett set down the strap in his hand and said, "I heard you were dead." Leela stood still. "That would have made things easier for you." His gaze dropped. "I suppose it would have." Wade stayed half a step behind her, silent, letting the meeting belong to her. That too mattered. Leela looked at the yard around them, the rail fence, the water trough, the post near the shed where they had tied her wrists. The world did not tilt or blur, she had half expected it to. Instead, everything was sharp, too sharp. "I came because I wanted one thing from you," she said. "Not pity, not apology dressed up to make you feel lighter, just the truth." Emmett's hands hung loose at his sides. "You already know it. I know you saw Boyd Mercer steal the money. I know you saw him take the horse. I know you watched them drag me out here anyway." She took one step closer. "What I don't know is what kind of man does that, and then goes on feeding horses, as if he didn't help ruin a life." He shut his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they looked older still. "A coward," he said. The word landed flat and heavy in the yard. Leela had waited a long time to hear it. She thought it might feel like victory. It did not. It felt like weather finally arriving after a season of pressure in the air. Emmett went on before she could answer. "Boyd was the stable owner's son. Sheriff Kelton drank with his uncle every Saturday night." Everyone knew where blame was going before the first question got asked. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. "I told myself there wasn't a thing I could do. Told myself they'd ruin me too." "So you let them ruin me instead?" He nodded once, no defense left in him now. "Yes." Wade's voice came calm from behind her. "Why keep quiet after the boy came back?" Emmett looked at him, because by then she'd already been marked. His mouth twisted. Once a town has done something ugly, it starts protecting the ugliness. Men defend the thing they should be ashamed of because shame costs more than cruelty. Leela turned that over. It sounded true. That was the worst part. Truth coming from a weak man still left a bruise. "You have daughters?" she asked. He blinked, startled. "One." "Then picture her here." Leela's voice never rose. It did not need to. "Picture 4 men holding her while another heats iron. Picture everyone else looking away because it's easier." She stepped closer still. "Now tell me fear was too large a price." Emmett's eyes filled, though he did not cry. "There isn't a day I don't think on it." Believed him. That did not spare him. It only made the whole thing sadder. He swallowed and glanced toward the office, then toward the town road, as if measuring what kind of courage remained in him. "I wrote a statement 2 nights ago," he said. "Been carrying it in my coat like a fool. Sheriff's been pressing men to repeat the old lie since word came that you were alive." He reached slowly inside his jacket. Wade's hand shifted near his belt, but Emmett only pulled out a folded paper. "I signed what I saw. Named Boyd, named Kelton too." Leela stared at the paper, then at him. "Why now?" His answer came small and late and honest. "Because I got tired of waking up a coward." Wade stepped forward then and took the paper first, unfolding it enough to scan the lines. Leela watched his eyes move. His face did not change much, but she saw the moment he understood it was real. "He names dates," Wade said. "Names witnesses, says the sheriff threatened him." He refolded it carefully and handed it to her. The paper felt heavier than it should have. 1 sheet, ink. A few lines, not justice, not enough, but something. Leela slipped it inside her coat. Before anyone could speak again, boots thudded on the boardwalk beyond the gate. Sheriff Kelton entered the yard with 2 deputies behind him. The old fear struck Leela low and hard, but it did not own her the way it once had. Wade moved beside her at once, not in front, not behind. Beside. His presence steadied the ground under her boots. Kelton looked from Leela to Wade to Emmett, and his mouth thinned. He was a broad man with a neat mustache and the bland eyes of someone who had practiced calling cruelty order for so long he believed himself honorable. "Well," he said, "stray dogs do have a habit of finding their way back." Wade's voice came cool, careful. Kelton ignored him, his gaze fixed on Leela's face. "I told you last time I saw you that if you came back, I'd finish what the court of decent people started." "There was no court," Leela said, "just cowards." The deputies shifted. One looked uneasy. The other looked young enough not to understand what he had walked into. Kelton smiled without warmth. "You still have a talent for defiance. Too bad it won't help." He held out a hand. "You've got one chance to come quiet." Wade did not move, but something in him changed. Leela felt it like a wire pulling tight. "On what charge?" he asked. "Theft, flight from lawful detention, threatening an officer." Kelton's eyes flicked toward Wade, "and harboring her makes you party to it." Wade gave one short nod, almost amused. "You came fast. Must have been worried she'd talk before you got here." Kelton's smile faded. "You ranchers always think land makes you untouchable." "No," Wade said, "just less willing to bow to liars." The deputies looked at each other then. Small thing, important thing. Leela saw it, so did Kelton. He took one step forward. "Enough of this. Girl, put your hands where I can see them." Leela slowly raised both hands away from her sides. Not in surrender, in control. Her voice stayed steady. "Emmett Pike has written what he saw." Kelton's eyes cut to Emmett, and for the first time a crack appeared in him. "That's so?" the sheriff asked. Emmett went pale but held his ground. "Yes." Kelton's stare sharpened into something ugly. "You forget who signs freight licenses in this county." Wade's answer came first. "And you forget threats only work when men are still ashamed to speak." Kelton reached for his sidearm. Leela moved before thought had time to get in the way. Her revolver came free in one clean pull, and she fired once. Not at the sheriff. At the hitching chain hanging beside him. The shot rang like iron, splitting the day. The chain snapped loose and dropped hard against the trough, making both deputies flinch and Kelton jerk sideways with his hand half drawn. When the sound cleared, Leela stood with the revolver trained straight at his chest. "Next one is not for warning," she said. Silence flooded the yard. Even the horses seemed to hold still. Kelton looked at the broken chain, then at her face, and whatever picture of helplessness he had carried about her died right there. Wade did not smile, but Leela could feel his fierce pride like heat beside her. One deputy slowly lifted both hands. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "maybe we ought to hear the statement." Kelton did not take his eyes off Leela. "You taking orders from a fugitive now?" The younger deputy swallowed. "No, sir. I'm taking notice of a witness and a gun pointed at a mess that don't smell right." It was not courage in full, but it was enough to shift the ground again. Emmett spoke next, voice shaking but audible. "Boyd Mercer stole the money. I saw him. Kelton knew before she ever fled." The words hung in the yard, no taking them back now. Kelton looked around and understood at last that the shape of the day had changed against him. Not enough men willing to stand with him, not enough certainty left in the lie. He eased his hand away from the pistol. Wade spoke then, each word plain. "You will step back. You will leave. And if any law wants to settle this proper, it can be done before a judge with witnesses present, not with irons in a stable yard." Kelton's face went hard as cured leather. "This isn't over." "No," Leela said, "it's finally starting." Kelton backed away one step, then another. He signaled the deputies and turned toward the gate. No dignity left in it, just retreat dressed as delay. When he was gone, the yard felt strangely wide. Leela lowered the revolver. Her hand shook only after the danger had passed. Wade saw it and gently took the gun from her fingers. "You hit the chain," he said. She let out one unsteady breath. "I know." He looked at her with something fierce and warm in his eyes. "You shoot straighter than any son I never had." This time when she smiled, there was nothing hunted in it. But as the feeling spread through her, another truth rose with it. Kelton had backed down. That did not mean he was finished. They did not leave Fort Custer at once. Wade wanted to. Leela could see it in the way his shoulders stayed tight and his eyes kept moving to the road as if trouble might come back wearing a different face. But turning and riding out too fast would have looked like fear, and fear was what men like Kelton fed on. So they stayed long enough for the truth to plant itself where everyone could see it. Emmett Pike took them first to the clerk above the feed office, a narrow room that smelled of ink, dust, and old paper. The clerk was a thin man with round spectacles and a habit of clearing his throat before every sentence. He read Emmett's signed statement twice, then looked up at Leela over the tops of his lenses. "You are saying this was false from the start?" Leela stood with both hands resting on the edge of the desk. Her voice came out steady. "I am saying men with power wanted the quickest lie, and I was small enough to pin it on." The clerk glanced at Wade, then back to Emmett. "And you witnessed the owner's son taking the horse and money?" "Yes," Emmett said, "and the sheriff knew." Emmett swallowed. "Yes." The clerk dipped his pen, wrote 3 lines in a ledger, then sanded the page. It was such a small sound, scratch of metal, soft shake of sand. Yet Leela felt something inside her settle as she listened to it, not because writing fixed what had been done. It did not. But because for once the truth was entering a room by the front door instead of begging to be let in through the back. When they stepped outside again, a few people were watching from the boardwalk. Word moved fast in a place like Fort Custer, faster than fire some days. Leela recognized a woman from the mercantile who had once looked straight through her as if she were dirt on a floorboard. Now the woman held that gaze for a second too long, then gave one stiff nod. It was not kindness. It was not apology, but it was acknowledgement. Wade leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "You all right?" Leela looked down the street where the sheriff had gone. "Not all the way." He nodded. "That is honest." They spent the night at a small boarding house on the far side of town, because Wade refused to ride after dark with Kelton, still nursing his anger. The landlady asked no questions once she saw Wade's face and the rifles they carried. She gave them 2 rooms and a hot meal of stew, bread, and boiled carrots. Leela ate slowly. The day had drained something out of her, not strength, something older and darker than that. After supper she stood outside on the narrow back porch where the evening air smelled of ash and damp wood. The town had gone quiet in pieces, a wagon rolling somewhere far off, laughter from the saloon, a dog barking once and then no more. Wade joined her after a while, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You should sleep," he said, handing one over. "So should you." "I will." She turned the warm cup in her hands. "You lying to spare me or to spare yourself?" He looked out over the alley. "Both." That almost drew a smile from her. Almost. She stared at the dim outline of the stable roof in the distance. "I thought today would feel cleaner." "Why?" "Because I faced him, because Emmett spoke, because Kelton had to back down in front of people." She shook her head. "I thought maybe the hurt would know it had lost." Wade was quiet a moment. "Hurt doesn't surrender that neat." She let that sit. It felt true, too true to argue with. "Then what does change?" He rested his forearms on the porch rail. "A person stops bowing to it." Leela looked at him. There was nothing grand in his face when he said things like that. No sermon in him, no performance. Just a hard, plain truth offered the same way he offered water or a saddle blanket. She had come to trust that more than any comforting speech. After a while she said, "When he reached for his gun, I was not afraid to fire." Wade turned his head. "I know. That troubles me." "It should." She took a breath. "But I was not afraid because I wanted blood. I was not afraid because I knew I did not belong beneath his hand anymore." At that Wade's eyes softened. "That does not trouble me at all." Something in her chest loosened. The next morning they rode west before sunrise. No one tried to stop them. Kelton did not appear. Maybe he was waiting for a different field to fight on. Maybe he was learning, late and bitter, that fear went only so far once truth found company. The ride home took 2 days. On the first day they crossed river flats bright with late light, then camped among cottonwoods where the horses could graze. Wade built the fire while Leela laid out the bedrolls. By now the work between them had its own quiet ease. She handed him the coffee pot before he asked. He passed her the tin plates before she reached. Small things. The kind that made a life before anyone dared name it one. When the beans had warmed and the dark deepened around them, Wade sat back against his saddle and studied her across the fire. "You have been somewhere else all evening." Leela did not pretend not to understand. "I was thinking about the ranch." His mouth eased at one corner. "Good thoughts or bad?" "Strange ones." She picked at the seam of the blanket over her knees. "When I first came there, all I wanted was a place to breathe without someone hunting me. Then you taught me to shoot, then to stay, then to trust." She lifted her eyes. "Now when I picture tomorrow, that place comes first." Wade looked at the fire for a moment before answering. "It comes first for me too." The night held still around them. Leela said, "That frightens me less than it did." "It ought to." She tilted her head. "You and your ought to. It has served me all right." That finally pulled a soft laugh from her. The sound drifted up into the branches. Wade watched her with that same quiet steadiness that had first unsettled her and now steadied her more than anything else. "What happens when we get back?" she asked. He answered the way he always did, without dressing it up. "We keep going." "That is not much of a plan." "It is if a man means it." She knew then that this was one of the reasons she loved him. Not because he promised impossible safety, not because he could outshoot or outstare other men, because he never lied to make pain easier. He met it straight on and asked if she would stand there with him. The second day home they rode through low hills where the pine opened to grass. By late afternoon, the ridge above Wade's ranch came into view. Leela saw the barn roof first, then the line of fence, then the faint silver ribbon of creek beyond the north pasture. Home. The word still startled her every time it rose, but now it felt less borrowed. When they came into the yard, everything stood as they had left it. Water barrel, shed, porch rail. The plain, steady shape of a life waiting to be resumed. Wade dismounted, took a long look around, then turned to help her down, though she needed no help. His hand settled at her waist anyway, holding a second longer than the motion required. Leela searched his face. "What is it?" He looked almost uncertain, which on Wade Mercer was a rare sight. "Come with me." He led her not to the house but around it, past the smokehouse, and up the slight rise behind the barn where the land opened westward. From there, the ranch spread below them in long gold-brown strips of pasture, the creek cutting dark through the cottonwoods, the far trees gathering against the edge of the hills. Evening light lay over everything soft and deep. Wade stopped near the old fence post where they had first practiced with bottles weeks before. For a moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper, not the clerk's ledger copy, not Emmett's statement, a deed map, hand-marked and worn at the corners. "There is a parcel east of the creek bend," he said. "Good ground, water enough, room for a small cabin if a person wanted one." He looked at the paper, then at her. "I had been thinking on it before we rode out, about asking if you'd want it written into your name." Leela stared at him. The wind moved through the grass between them. He went on, slower now. "Not charity, not because you need saving, because if you're staying, I want this land to know it. I want no man to ever look at you and think you can be driven off by a lie again." Her throat tightened so hard she could not answer at first. Wade stepped closer. "And if you are not wanting your own parcel, then I still want you here." His voice dropped lower. "In the house, in the life, with me." Leela had lived through fear enough to know when something true stood in front of her. This was truth, plain and quiet and stronger than anything loud. She took the paper from his hand and held it against her chest. "You told me once not to go back to being what they branded me." "I did." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes and no shame in them now. "I think I know who I am instead." He touched her face with one rough hand. "Tell me." Her voice trembled only once. "Yours if you'll have me, and this place's if it will have me too." Wade let out a breath that sounded like a man setting down a burden he had carried too long. He pulled her to him then, and she went without hesitation. He kissed her slow under the open sky with the whole ranch stretched below them and the light fading gold along the ridge. There was no hurry in it, no fear chasing at the edges, just certainty, just the deep, quiet fact of having reached the place where running ended. When they drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Then we build from here." Leela looked out over the land again. The barn, the pasture, the creek, the hills beyond, everything the world once told her she did not deserve, everything she had survived long enough to touch. For the first time since the brand, she did not feel marked by what had been done to her. She felt claimed by what she had chosen. And when Wade took her hand and led her back down toward the house, she went with him not as a fugitive, not as a girl wearing someone else's name, but as a woman walking straight into the life she meant to keep.